The following week, the gentle tension between Emily and Daniel had settled into an unspoken rhythm. Their interactions were no longer merely neighborly. They carried a subtle depth that made Emily's heart race, even in the quietest of moments. Every smile, every wave, every fleeting glance seemed charged with meaning, though neither dared to speak it aloud. Emily's days had begun to feel heavier. Work was monotonous, and the silence of her home seemed more profound than ever with Tom's absence. She often found herself staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, questioning her choices, her life, and the small compromises that had led her here. There was a longing she could no longer ignore, a yearning for warmth, for understanding, for connection that went beyond surface-level exchanges. It was late Friday evening when everything changed. Tom had gone on another business trip, leaving Emily alone in the quiet house. The hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock the only sounds. She wrapped herself in a thick shawl and stepped outside, drawn to the night air, which smelled faintly of wet leaves and distant pines. The street was empty, save for Daniel sitting casually on his porch steps. A single porch light cast a gentle glow around him, outlining his features, and lending the scene a sense of intimacy that made Emily's heart skip. He noticed her and gave a tentative wave. "Hey," he said softly as she approached. "Mind if I sit?" Emily hesitated. The rational part of her mind screamed for restraint. She had a husband, responsibilities, a life that demanded loyalty. But the emotional part of her, the part that had been starved for attention, for warmth, for understanding, urged her forward. She nodded, settling beside him on the steps. For a long moment, neither spoke. The night air was calm, almost sacred, filled with the soft whispers of wind and the faint rustle of leaves. Emily felt her nerves calm, her heart rate slowing slightly, even as anticipation hummed through her veins. Finally, Emily found herself speaking. She started small, talking about her day, about the monotony, about the quiet moments that stretched endlessly between responsibilities. Then, almost before she could stop herself, her words turned deeper. She spoke of the loneliness she often felt, the way her life sometimes seemed hollow, the subtle ache of unspoken desires and unmet needs. Daniel listened without interruption. His gaze was steady, calm, and full of a quiet intensity that made Emily feel both exposed and safe. It was rare. This kind of attention. It doesn't demand answers or force confessions, but simply exists, giving space for honesty to surface. "You know," he said softly, after she had paused to take a breath, "it's easy to feel invisible sometimes, to think that the world doesn't see you. But the truth is, you're not invisible, Emily, not to those who matter, and certainly not to me." Her breath caught. There was no judgment in his words, no pity, only sincerity. It was disarming in a way she hadn't anticipated. She wanted to speak, to respond, to reach for him, but the fear of the unknown held her back. Instead, she simply nodded, letting the silence stretch between them, filled with the weight of unspoken feelings. Daniel's eyes lingered on hers, steady and unwavering. "I've noticed you," he continued softly, "not just when you step outside or tend your plants, but the little things. The way you carry yourself, even in the quiet moments. You deserve to be seen. Truly seen." Emily felt warmth spread through her chest, mingling with a complex swirl of emotions, relief, longing, fear, and a deep, almost frightening excitement. Her life had been predictable, safe, and yet this man, with his quiet presence and subtle gestures, had shattered that predictability in the most unexpected way. She looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, afraid to meet his gaze, afraid of what she might find there. But Daniel reached out gently, his fingers brushing against hers in the kind of fleeting touch that carries the weight of unspoken promises. Emily didn't pull away. She couldn't. There was a comfort in his touch, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. The connection between them was electric, yet tender, a delicate balance between longing and restraint. The night stretched on as they shared pieces of themselves, stories of their pasts, glimpses into their fears and dreams, and confessions that neither had spoken to anyone else. Emily spoke of the quiet heartbreak that had settled in her marriage, the loneliness that had crept into her days, and the desire for something real, something genuine, that had been absent for far too long. Daniel listened with patience, his hand occasionally brushing hers, each touch leaving a ripple of warmth in its wake. There was no pressure, no expectation, only the simple act of being present with one another. And yet, in that presence, Emily felt the stirrings of something dangerous and thrilling, a spark that had the power to ignite emotions she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly, his voice carrying a quiet intensity. "And braver. I see that in you. Even when you don't see it yourself." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition that someone truly understood her, that someone could see the layers beneath her carefully maintained exterior. She wanted to tell him how much his words meant, how deeply they resonated, but the vulnerability of it all left her momentarily speechless. Daniel squeezed her hand gently, a silent reassurance. And in that moment, Emily felt the world shift around her. The boundaries she had carefully constructed in her life, the walls she had built to protect her heart, began to crumble, not violently, but subtly, imperceptibly, in a way that left her both frightened and exhilarated. "I don't know what this is," Emily whispered finally, her voice trembling slightly. "But I feel like I've been waiting for it, for someone like you, for a long time." Daniel's gaze softened, and he smiled. A small, tender smile that carried both hope and understanding. "Maybe," he said quietly, "we've both been waiting without knowing it." The night air grew cooler, and the gentle rhythm of crickets and distant traffic enveloped them in a cocoon of quiet intimacy. Emily felt her heart racing, caught between the safety of her familiar life and the allure of the unknown, the possibility of something more. And then, almost instinctively, Daniel leaned slightly closer, his hand brushing hers again, lingering just a moment longer than before. Emily's breath caught, her pulse quickening, and she realized with a mix of excitement and fear that the connection between them was no longer something she could ignore or dismiss. They sat together for hours, talking, laughing softly, sharing silences that spoke volumes, each moment drawing them closer. Emily knew that what she felt for Daniel was more than fleeting curiosity. It was a deep, undeniable attraction, a longing that had been dormant for far too long. And yet, the awareness of her complicated life, of the boundaries she had always maintained, made every sensation more intense, more thrilling, more dangerous. When the night finally drew to a close, they stood, hesitating on the threshold between the warmth of shared intimacy and the reality of their separate lives. Emily's heart ached with the knowledge that the world outside their porch steps was still waiting responsibilities, obligations and choices that could not be ignored. Daniel looked at her, his eyes soft, steady, and full of unspoken promises. "I'll see you tomorrow," he asked quietly. Emily nodded, her lips curving into a small smile, her mind swirling with a mix of hope, fear, and anticipation. "Yes," she whispered, "tomorrow." As she watched him retreat into his house, Emily felt a strange mixture of longing and uncertainty. The connection they had shared that night was undeniable, profound, and charged with possibility. And yet, it was also fragile, suspended in the delicate balance between caution and desire, between loyalty and the tantalizing allure of the heart's deepest yearnings. Lying in bed later that night, Emily replayed the moments over and over, the softness of his touch, the warmth of his gaze, the tenderness of his words. She wondered if Daniel felt the same intensity, the same pull, the same quiet thrill of something that could grow into something life-altering. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that the events of that night were just the beginning. The connection between them had been ignited, a spark that could not be easily extinguished, a silent promise of emotions yet to be explored, of questions yet to be asked, of desires yet to be fulfilled. Little did she know, the days ahead would test her heart, challenge her loyalties, and awaken passions she had long kept hidden. And at the center of it all was Daniel Miller, whose quiet presence and unexpected gestures had begun to unravel the fabric of her carefully contained world, leaving Emily questioning everything she thought she knew about love, desire, and the possibilities of the heart. The morning after the rain-soaked evening that had shaken Emily's routine, the world seemed lighter, somehow. Sunlight filtered through the thin clouds, glinting off the wet pavement and warming the earth with the promise of a fresh day. Emily busied herself with breakfast, trying to immerse her mind in mundane tasks, making scrambled eggs for her daughter, brewing a fresh pot of coffee, checking her emails, but her thoughts kept drifting to the previous night. Daniel. She couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he had appeared suddenly to help her with the spilled apples, the gentleness in his voice, the ease with which he had moved through her small disaster. It was strange. This sense of connection she felt with a man who, on paper, was nothing more than a neighbor, and yet, in her heart it felt significant, as if the world had shifted in a subtle but irreversible way. Emily sighed, trying to push the thoughts away. She had responsibilities, a daughter to care for, a marriage that, while distant, still held its fragile threads. And yet, there was something about Daniel that lingered like a soft echo she couldn't shake. She had just finished loading the dishwasher when the sound of a knock at the door startled her. It wasn't the usual late-morning delivery she sometimes expected, nor was it her daughter rushing off to a friend's house. It was deliberate, soft but insistent. Emily hesitated, her hand frozen mid-air, her mind racing through possibilities. Who could it be? She muttered under her breath. When she opened the door, she found Daniel standing there. He held a small basket in his hands, the faint aroma of peaches drifting from it. Sunlight danced across the skin of the fruit, making them look almost golden, almost magical in the morning light. "Good morning, Emily," he said, his voice calm and easy, carrying the same warmth she remembered from the previous evening. "Thought you might like these." Emily blinked, momentarily speechless. You brought these for me?" she asked, her voice a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. "Yes," he replied simply, a small, shy smile playing on his lips. "My sister sent me some from her farm up in Washington. I have too many, and I thought, well, maybe you'd like some." Emily hesitated, staring at the basket. It was an ordinary gesture, really a simple gift from a neighbor, but it felt extraordinary in the context of her life. It was thoughtfulness, attention, care, the very things she had been craving in her empty days and quiet evenings. Her fingers brushed his as she accepted the basket, and an unexpected warmth spread through her. The memory of the night before, of his hands gathering the apples, came rushing back, mingling with this new, tender offering. "Thank you," she said softly, almost breathlessly. "That's very thoughtful of you." Daniel shrugged lightly, as if it were nothing, but Emily could see the faint tension in his posture, the subtle way he avoided meeting her eyes for more than a heartbeat. "It's nothing really," he said. Just thought I'd share a little bit of summer before it's gone. There was a quiet pause between them, a moment suspended in time. The kind of silence that isn't empty but heavy with unspoken meaning. Emily didn't move, and neither did he. She noticed the way the sunlight caught the strands of his hair, the calm determination in his posture, the steady, comforting rhythm of his breathing. Then, as if aware of the intensity of the moment, Daniel cleared his throat. "I notice you're often on your own," he said, his voice careful, measured. "If you ever need help with anything, don't hesitate." The words hit her harder than she expected. They weren't just polite neighborly words. There was an underlying sincerity, a recognition of something unspoken, something that had been absent from her life for far too long. Emily smiled, a small, polite smile, though inside her heart raced. Thank you, Daniel. That's very kind of you." He nodded once, then turned, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had said enough and knew when to leave. Emily closed the door behind him, pressing her hand to her chest as though to steady her racing heart. The basket of peaches was heavy, but it felt nothing compared to the weight of her thoughts. All day, she found herself stealing glances toward Daniel's house. There he was in the afternoon sun, tending to his garden, moving with quiet grace and focus. He seemed so ordinary, yet extraordinary. She wondered what it would be like to have someone notice her like that, not just glance politely or nod from across the lawn, but see her, truly see her. The following days brought subtle, gentle interactions that deepened the effect. He would wave when she stepped outside, offer a few quiet words when their paths crossed, or pass by with a friendly smile. Each time, Emily felt her pulse quicken, her mind swirling with questions she didn't dare speak aloud. What did it mean when a neighbor seemed to care in ways that no one else did? Was it admiration? Was it something more? And then, one Friday evening, everything shifted again. Tom was away, as usual, leaving the house silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the clock. Emily, restless and seeking solace, stepped out onto her small porch. She wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and inhaled the crisp night air. Daniel was there, sitting casually on his own porch steps, the glow of the porch light outlining him in a warm halo. He looked up, noticed her, and gave a small, tentative wave. Emily felt her stomach flutter. Something in his presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore. "Hey," he said softly as she approached. "Mind if I sit?" Emily hesitated, then realized she wanted to. No, not at all," she said, settling herself on the steps beside him. For a long moment, they simply sat in silence, listening to the distant hum of the street, the soft rustle of leaves, the faint whisper of wind. Emily found herself speaking before she could stop herself. She spoke of her day, of her frustrations, of the growing sense of emptiness she sometimes felt. She spoke of her daughter, her work, her fears, and her hopes. Daniel listened. Not with judgment, not with pity, but with a gentle attention that made her feel as though her words mattered more than anything else in the world. His eyes met hers occasionally, steady and calm, and Emily felt a warmth spread through her that she hadn't realized she had missed so desperately. "You're not invisible, Emily," he said finally, his voice soft but deliberate. "Anyone with eyes could see you deserve better." The weight of his words settled over her like a soft blanket, comforting and frightening all at once. It wasn't pity. It wasn't a casual observation. It was acknowledgement, recognition, the kind of attention she had been craving for years. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to speak, to ask what he meant, to reach for him. But the fear of the unknown held her back. Instead, she nodded, her eyes glistening, heart pounding in ways she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. And then, almost instinctively, his hand brushed against hers. Just a light, fleeting touch, yet it sent a ripple through her body. A reminder of sensations she had long forgotten. Emily didn't pull away. She couldn't. There was a comfort, a longing, a dangerous sweetness in that single, small gesture. The world around them seemed to pause, the night air heavy with possibility. And in that quiet, shared space, Emily realized that the connection she felt with Daniel was no longer just a passing curiosity. It was something more, a quiet spark, delicate yet undeniable, that threatened to ignite feelings she wasn't sure. She was ready to confront Dot as the evening stretched on. They parted with a simple nod, a smile, a shared glance that lingered longer than necessary. Emily went back inside, her heart racing, her mind tangled with thoughts of him. She tried to focus on her work, on her routine, but Daniel's presence clung to her thoughts like a soft echo she couldn't shake. That night, lying in bed, she turned over the moments of the day, replaying them in her mind. She thought about his eyes, his voice, the light touch of his hand. She wondered if he felt it too, the pull between them, the tension, the quiet anticipation. Emily knew that her life was about to change. She didn't know how, or when, or why, but something had shifted. A door had opened, and she could feel the faint brush of possibility on the other side. And at the center of it all, standing quietly on the other side of her driveway, was Daniel Miller, a man whose unexpected gesture had left her questioning everything she thought she knew about her heart, her life, and the boundaries she had so carefully maintained. The Harper house was quiet that evening. A soft drizzle fell over the suburban street outside Portland, Oregon, tapping lightly against the windows, painting the world in muted gray. Inside, Emily Harper sat at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea that had long since gone lukewarm. She gazed at the rain streaming down the glass, her thoughts tangled in the same way the clouds were tangled above. Her life, as she had known it for years, felt like it was slowly unraveling. The house was full of furniture, full of her, daughter's laughter, full of the echoes of a marriage that had grown distant, but at the same time, it felt empty. Tom, her husband, had been traveling for work again, leaving her to navigate the quiet alone. Their conversations lately had become mechanical, devoid of warmth or connection, and she found herself retreating more and more into her own thoughts, afraid that if she reached out, she would find nothing waiting on the other side. Outside her window, another presence lingered in the periphery of her life. Daniel Miller, her neighbor, had lived next door for years. Their houses were separated only by a narrow driveway, a thin stretch of grass, and a shared fence that had seen countless summers pass by. He was a quiet man in his mid-30s, with dark hair that caught the sunlight when he worked in his yard and eyes that seemed to hold a certain gentle steadiness, as if he carried the calm of the world within him. Emily had noticed him countless times before, leaning against his porch railing with a mug of coffee in hand, tinkering with his car, or mowing the lawn on warm summer evenings. They would exchange polite waves, small smiles that acknowledged each other's existence without demanding conversation. That had been enough. Also, she had told herself that evening was different. The drizzle had grown heavier, soaking the asphalt and leaving the air thick with the smell of wet earth. Emily had stepped outside to unload groceries from her car, bundled in a raincoat that did little to keep her warm. As she lifted the bag from the trunk, it slipped from her hands, spilling apples across the driveway. She gasped, cursing herself under her breath as the fruit rolled toward the edge of the wet grass. "Shit," she muttered, crouching to pick them up, the rain soaking her hair and clinging to her skin. She felt an almost absurd sense of embarrassment at the sight of a simple mishap, as if the universe had decided to spotlight her clumsiness for all to see. Then she noticed him. Daniel was there. He had come out of his house without hesitation, without an umbrella, without a word of complaint, and bent down to gather the apples with his own hands. Water dripped from the brim of his hair and onto the soaked driveway, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he offered her a smile small, unassuming, but somehow so disarming that Emily felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Here, let me help," he said, handing her the apples he had gathered, his voice calm, warm, and steady. Emily's fingers brushed his as she took them, and a strange current ran through her that she couldn't explain. It wasn't just the physical touch, it was the sincerity in his eyes, the gentle way he held himself, as if nothing in the world mattered more than that single act of kindness. She wanted to tell herself it was nothing, just a neighbor helping another neighbor, but her heart, stubborn and unruly, whispered otherwise. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than usual. She realized she had been holding her breath, waiting for something she didn't fully understand. Daniel nodded, standing and brushing the rain from his shoulders. "No problem. Happens to the best of us." His eyes lingered on hers for a brief moment longer than expected, and Emily felt a curious warmth settle in her chest, one that had nothing to do with the tea she had left behind. She retreated to her house, the groceries finally in her hands, her mind a swirl of thoughts and emotions she hadn't felt in years. The apples had been saved, yes, but something deeper had been stirred. The realization that small gestures could carry enormous weight. That sometimes a simple act of kindness could shake the foundation of a carefully constructed life. That night, Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling above her. She listened to the steady rhythm of the rain against the roof, the distant hum of cars passing on the quiet street. And she thought about Daniel Miller. She thought about the way he had smiled at her. The warmth in his eyes, the steadiness in his voice. She tried to push it away, tried to remind herself that he was just a neighbor, a friendly presence in a world that had grown cold. And yet, the thought lingered. It lingered stubbornly, unbidden, unwelcome, but impossible to ignore. She felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could notice her. Not the version of herself she projected to the world, but the version that existed in the quiet moments of longing and loneliness. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the world glistening and fresh, the air filled with the scent of wet grass and distant pine trees. Emily stepped outside to water her plants, a small routine she clung to as a grounding ritual. And there he was again, Daniel, leaning casually against his porch railing, coffee mug in hand, as if he had been waiting for her. Their eyes met, and this time the smile that passed between them carried a subtle acknowledgement, a recognition that went beyond polite neighborly gestures. Emily shook her head at herself. Get a grip, she thought. She had a life, a family, responsibilities. And yet, the pull she felt toward him was undeniable. Every glance, every brief interaction, felt like a gentle tug on the strings of her heart. Strings she had believed were broken or forgotten. In the days that followed, Emily found herself noticing him more often. The way he moved through his yard, the way he hummed quietly to himself as he worked, the way he would glance toward her house, as if to check whether she was watching. She tried to rationalize it. Perhaps he was just polite, just attentive in a way that she misread. But the truth gnawed at her. It felt different. Dangerous, in a subtle, thrilling way. One afternoon, as she returned from the grocery store, she noticed Daniel carrying a small ladder and a box of tools. He looked up, caught her gaze, and gave a casual wave. But Emily saw the way his eyes softened, the slight smile that reached his eyes and lingered there, and her pulse quickened. She realized something unsettling. She was thinking about him when she shouldn't be. She was imagining his voice in the quiet moments of her day, wondering what it would feel like to have him close, to hear him speak just for her. And she felt guilty for these feelings, guilty for thinking about someone other than her husband, even if her marriage had become a distant echo of its former warmth. That evening, Emily sat at her kitchen table once more, staring out at the twilight sky, feeling a strange mix of longing and fear. Her life was orderly, controlled, predictable, and yet Daniel's presence introduced a chaos that was subtle but undeniable. A question formed in her mind, one she tried hard to dismiss. What if this is what I've been waiting for all along? Her heart ached at the thought, a mixture of excitement and dread. She had spent years carefully navigating a world that no longer felt hers, and now, with one unexpected gesture, one simple act of kindness, a door had opened, a door she wasn't sure she was ready to step through, yet couldn't bear to close. And so, the drizzle of rain, the scattered apples, the gentle smile of a neighbor, these became the beginning of something Emily could not yet name, something that whispered of possibility, of connection, of a quiet romance waiting to bloom in the unlikeliest of places. The night grew darker, and she closed her eyes, holding on to the warmth of that single moment, the brush of his hands, the weight of his gaze. And in the silence, she felt the first flicker of a desire she hadn't felt in years, a desire not just to be noticed, but to be truly seen. Little did she know, that evening marked the first step toward a journey that would challenge her heart, test her loyalties, and awaken emotions she thought she had long buried. And at the heart of it all, standing quietly on the other side of a narrow driveway, was Daniel Miller, whose presence had shifted the axis of her world with nothing more than an unexpected, heartfelt gesture.